You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take.
Plan. I'm the enemy. Because I like to think.
You can travel like a Bobby doll. You can hang out like a biker's mom. You fit in anywhere you go. Bring your own style just to steal the show. You shine it so loud when it's flowing your step. Drink with the light, you drink and smoke on your bed. Love by all yourself, you know. You're always involved, you're the star that show.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We made it through another week. Now it's time to party. Good to see you guys. Really happy to chat with you. We've got quite a few things going on in the comic book industry at the moment.
Darren Wagner.
What's that?
So it's Darren Wagner. I was just saying hello.
Oh, okay. So there's so there's been a lot happening in the last few weeks, and I was thinking about how in last week's show where we had Pete Samedi on as a guest, and we were talking about courage and specifically moral courage in the comic book industry and how it's lacking so frequently that when you come across somebody like Pete, who regularly has demonstrated moral courage over the course of his publishing career, it's like a breath of fresh air. When in a healthy industry, you would run into people like that frequently. But because the industry hasn't been healthy in a long time, it's flipped. And so I was thinking about some of the other components to the downfall of the corporate comics industry. And I was thinking how, along with that lack of courage that and I'm sure you guys have seen from so many industry professionals who had chances to speak up and say, hey, this is a problem. We should really take care of this before it gets any worse. But they didn't, for whatever reason. And there are countless reasons why somebody wouldn't speak out. And, you know, I think a lot of us can relate to some of those reasons. A lot of us wouldn't relate to some of those reasons. Every case is different. Everybody's individual situation. Everyone has to live their own life. But one of the consequences of there not being a whole lot of moral courage on display in the industry over the last 20 to 25 years, I would say, Russ, because you had the industry crash in the mid to late 90s, which was a perfect opportunity to change a lot of the systemic problems, that led up to the crash, right? Do you remember, because you and I were both around when this happened, we lived through it. Do you remember any sort of industry leader, whether they worked for a publisher or a distributor or in any other capacity, maybe the head of a retail association? Do you remember anybody standing up and saying, hey, there are big problems here. We need to fix this?
No, I don't. I don't think I can think that. I've heard and read the occasional interview over the period, like that long period of time. People like Jim Shooter, who would come out and they'd mention something or say something, but there was never a direct look. we're playing with a house of cards. We've got to do something about it. And I think the trouble was it was, even though you had that crash in the 90s, it was pretty obvious why it happened.
Yeah.
Nobody ever looked at the comics themselves. They just looked at the predatory practices and the fact that a whole bunch of people came in to collect on the back of market changes.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like a car crash in slow motion. The car crash started with business practice.
Yeah.
I watched a video from Perch the other day, or it might have been last night actually, where we were saying, it's probably not very popular in certain circles. I don't know who he was possibly thinking or considering there, to say that forget what the content is of the comics. There are business issues here that need to be fixed, and he's not wrong.
Right.
To be honest, there are lots of problems with the content in mainstream comics, or in let's call it corporate comics. But there are some serious business issues. The way that they market comics, the comics getting out to the general public. Kids are not going to buy comics if they're not in front of them. It doesn't matter. You can say, "Oh, kids have got all this other stuff. They've got computer games and they've got streaming services and all this kind of stuff. They're never going to bother with comics again." No, it's rubbish.
Yeah.
A lot of them won't, but you'll always get a percentage of kids that would buy and like a comic if it was the right price, okay, and if it was stuck in front of them. Ergo, newsstand. And that was the first nail in the coffin way back when they got rid of newsstand. Don't get me wrong, I love comic shops, but there's no reason why you can't have comic shops and newsstand working together.
Right, doing both.
Or at the very least working in parallel.
Yeah.
That was where the first problems began. And since then, it's just been, predatory practice after predatory practice, to be honest.
They were complementary. I mean, technically they were competitors to each other, but for the good of the industry and the good of readers, they were complementary.
It's like Pete was saying last week. He was selling stuff in other places, and suddenly some comic shops would say, "Oh no, we're not going with you anymore." It's like, what is wrong with you? Just the more comics that are out there, the more comics get sold. It's as simple as that.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you restrict them to small places, comic book speakeasies, then not as many people will know they're there, and they'll be forgotten in the minds of the normies, because you've heard it so many times, people saying, "Oh, I spoke to a kid or whatever," and they said, "You still make those things?" That's because they're not everywhere. Okay, and they were everywhere, and even if your market is reduced because of other forces like streaming or gaming or whatever, if they're out there, they can be sold. And there's always a way around that. And of course, I suppose if you're talking about people standing up and saying, "Look, no," nobody stood up and said no back then, did they?
Right.
They just saw the greed. Diamond monopolized the whole thing, and people just sat on it and went, "Oh, okay, this works." Well, because those people that it worked for were effectively ignorant of the people that were getting left behind.
Yeah. And I do remember, and I can actually go back. I've got my "Trust Me, I'm a Historian" shirt on, because we're gonna do a little bit of a walk through history, only to set up the context for the broader conversation we're having today. But before we jump into that too much, I do want to welcome everybody to the show today. We've got Darren as our first chatter who was in the show today. He was early, and we always appreciate it when Darren shows up. His fellow Indianan, Past Master Dan, good to see you, sir. My favorite Panamanian, Pedro, as he says, "Welcome to Fultonland. There will be rides." And then we've got one of our buddies from 656 Comics, Oliver. Good to see you, my friend. I Borrow Ideas, and Amanda B, and Mr. Von Stugel.
Stugel.
Statistical Zero.
Yo, stat.
Good to see you all. Oz Great Stage from the Land Down Under. Good to see you, mate. And Amanda, I saw your comment when you first made it, but I think Russ might have been talking. I didn't want to interrupt, but Russ is the one who made that intro. So, and in case you are at work, Amanda, and you've got us muted, so you don't get in trouble with the boss, I'm gonna type in here. Russ made the intro. Amanda B. He's not just an illustrator, ladies and gentlemen. He's also a trailer putter together.
He's also a professional idiot. There you go.
He's a professional video trailer assembler. But he's not the senior trailer assembler in chief.
No, certainly not. We did have an interesting from past Master Dan. I used to be a retailer and I worked for a large LCS in Houston, and I constantly butted heads with Diamond. There you go.
Yeah, that I worked in comic book retail in the early 90s, and so we were a small shop. It was a new shop. I was friends with the owner, and basically I was the only regular employee, because since we were a small shop, we were brand new. So it was the owner and me. We worked there regularly, and then he had a couple of his family members as occasional part-time help, but I was the only one getting paid. And I was essentially the manager of the shop anytime the owner wasn't there, and he had me open. He had me closing. I did absolutely everything that he did, including closing out the register. He took money to the bank, and then he also did the ordering through Diamond, because he said it would have been cruel and unusual punishment to ask me to do that. So he took that on himself because it was so much hassle every single week just trying to get product from his only distributor that he could get his product from.
That's just it just beggars belief, doesn't it? And what you can see is throughout the whole industry now, not all of the industry, throughout it, this seemingly weird refusal to do business proper, just business, just make stuff that people like, it's beyond me. Like I mentioned it last week, I've done a lot of things. I know you have as well. I've been, I've serviced blue chip clients with my own company. That's blue chip over here means big companies.
Yeah.
I've been in retail. I've been in in retail design and point of sale programming for applications and websites that reuse data. And I've been an art director and a designer, layout artist, all kinds of different, distributive production stroke design creative environments. Had my own business, and I can't understand how some of the activities that have gone on that I've seen in the last 10 years, but came to understand about the last 25 years or more of just how the industry is run. You just think, well, what if I did half these things? I would have been fired. I would have never had my own business, but clients wouldn't have dealt with me.
Right.
Hard to believe the way some of it is done. It really is. And it's easy to, I know it's always easy on the flip side. It's always easy to complain. It's always easy to criticize. These businesses are, like Marvel and DC, they're obviously doing some things right, but purely on the ground. And this isn't just from a creator perspective. This is from a customer, a fan perspective. You kind of go, what? How are you making money? How are you doing anything? Obviously they're not in the ways that we would understand. They're doing it in different ways. It's being funded in different ways. Just it beggars belief sometimes the way that the industry works.
Well, and I do want to give credit to the people who both before the crash in the 90s, during and after. There were people who did stand up and say, hey, these are real problems and they need to be solved. Otherwise, we're not going to have an industry at some point. And the problem, though, is that they were far outnumbered by the people who lacked either the competence or the moral courage to stand up and say, yeah, you've got a point.
Yeah.
We really need to get a handle on this.
Well, they're so swamped that I didn't know anything about much of it. Like I say, at the time, mid-90s, I was buying comics.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been buying comics through the 80s and the 70s, but obviously as a kid.
Yeah.
Okay. In the mid-90s, I was a young man, loving X-Men and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Okay. And not really understanding what was going on at all. Realizing why are the comics not in shops anymore? Oh, they're in a comic shop. I'll go and buy them from a comic shop. I just went and fed the habit.
Right.
Okay, so I didn't actually come to understand an awful lot of this until more recently, and that just goes to show you that, like, no, you couldn't hear those voices, even though some of them there were some. It was only until later on that I read interviews and what have you, but it was very few people, and most of it was just drowned out.
It really didn't come to the attention of the average comic book reader until after the advent of the internet.
Yeah.
And when the internet became a common, it was almost like it became another household appliance. Everyone had a coffee maker or a blender and the internet. And by that point, then there were message boards and people were learning. There was a lot of industry professionals who were posting on message boards, some under their real name, some under aliases. And for the first time, the average reader, if they wanted to, they could find out what was going on behind the scenes that was so detrimental to the health of the overall industry. And I think that what ended up happening between the collapse of competition in the distribution side of the industry, where you went from something like 9 different distributors to 1 within the space of 4 to 5 years, between that and then the goal of DC's parent company and the goal of Marvel's parent company both no longer being to make sure that Marvel and DC were producing great comics for what I'll just say succinctly, the quote unquote right reasons. But they started having other business goals and other ideas about what they could be doing with their comic book companies. And so you had that, which was contributing to the problems in addition to the distribution monopoly problem. But then you also had this, I guess you would say, shift in attitudes of so many industry professionals, creators, and publishing executives, where so many of them grew up loving comics and loving working in comics. But when there began to be this socio-political agenda creeping in behind the scenes at the executive levels, certainly in the publishing companies, but then also some of the creators, it started to creep into their work. And prior to that, there had always been a very clearly stated respect for readers. And people who would come in to work for Marvel and DC would essentially get mentored to not only do their jobs well, but understand who their customers were.
Yeah.
It's not just the retailers who are ordering these comics. It's not just the distributor who's sending them out to retailers. It's the reader. And there was this moment where respect for the reader started to gradually creep over to contempt for the reader.
It wasn't just that. There's so many things that are going on here. There's the way that that comics are actually made.
Mhm.
So, for instance, back in the 60s and the 70s, you had high-level artists that would have people learning their trade and coming through with them in studios. That went through into the 80s, I believe, and some
Mhm.
of it hung around in the 90s. But as the production of comics changed, so that changed. We're all freelancers now. We all sit at home in our dungeon and do it. There's no bullpen anymore. There's no, not that I could have ever been in the bullpen because I didn't live in the New York area, and that
Right.
was part of it as well.
Right.
You know, a certain number of people lived in a certain area, and also the bullpen itself in some ways part of the mythology. So it's not, I'm not talking about it being an actual fact. I'm just talking about the way that things were produced back then had some, it had some hand in the fact that things have changed over time.
Yeah.
But also, my personal theory is that back then, Marvel and DC were in the business of making comics.
Hmm.
Yeah, they found lunchboxes and Twinkie adverts. They were in the business of making comics. Comics were out on the newsstand in their hundreds and millions, hundreds of thousands of millions. Okay. They were in the business of making comics. So from the very top to the very bottom,
Hmm.
everybody was focused on the business of making great comics.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was all about the reader.
Mhm.
Ergo, it's all about the end customer.
Yeah.
At some point, okay, and this includes the whole time up until now, including the purchase of the companies by larger corporates.
Hmm.
At some point, the comics became very much the side aspect. There were pamphlets, okay,
Yeah.
and it was more about films and IP and lunchboxes and T-shirts. They were going to make far more out of that. So what happens is, even with a few people that are still starry-eyed like us, that are
Mhm.
still going into comics because they love comics, the vast majority of the way that people think about comics is now not about the comics. So
Right.
if at the top of the tree they don't give a shit about comics, that's going to filter down
Yeah.
because their business is not comics anymore.
Yeah.
Their business is not comics.
Stato, I think, makes a great correlation here. He said comics have the same problem video game systems have. It used to be a game system. Now it's an all-in-one entertainment station.
There you go. Yes.
Comics are just parts of other things now.
Exactly, and because of that, the although you do still have passionate creatives involved,
Mhm.
even in corporate comics,
Yeah,
they
sure.
are there. They are there.
Yep.
Okay, but from the execs down, okay, they don't really give a shit about comics. They're not there to make comics. Comics just happen to be part of the whole thing that get pulled out.
Oh yeah.
That's why people like us. That's why low level independent creators
Mhm.
are more passionate because
Yeah.
they're there to make the comic. They're not. And so what happens is you also create this environment where, because it's part of a big entertainment environment, you start luring in people who aren't necessarily that passionate about comics.
Right.
They
They
maybe want to
view it
go on to be a fashion designer
exactly.
or get the deal at Netflix or be a storyboarder or whatever. Even
Mhm.
though storyboarding and drawing panels for comics has some very different focuses,
Yeah.
you need the same talents to do the jobs,
Yep.
but they're not the same thing. I mean, we had this conversation with, was it Alejandro? But
It was with I
was it
think it was with
Jose?
Jose. Yeah, Jose
We had
Garcia.
the conversation with Jose, and so you know that they're not the same thing. And a lot of these creatives, talented though they may be, are not passionate about comics, which is why you're seeing this drift in corporate comics. Okay, and because of that, the end user, the consumer, the reader, the fan, whatever you want to call them, they're the people that are effectively getting hung out to dry. Nobody
Yeah.
gives a shit. Okay,
Well,
because and part of that is also what we're talking about, the industry. If you take away the mass market appeal, like
Mhm.
the news stand,
Yeah.
then straight away you're taking that element out, and the business goes, oh well, it's not that important anymore because we're not mass market anymore.
Mhm.
So you've got all these strands going on. You've got production, you've got the business, you've got the fact that the expanded view of what the business sees as its business, as its core, is diluting comics, and so ergo the customers aren't as important anymore. So you've got all these things going on, and then you're inviting other creative talent in who aren't necessarily as passionate about it, and so it gets diluted even further.
Yeah, and I think that it kind of takes us to the next moment in the history of the industry where a lot of the people who at one time had respected the reader and really tried to provide the best entertainment product they could for the benefit of the reader. A lot of them, not all, because like you said, there are still passionate creators in corporate comics today who are trying to do the best job they can, and they're trying to do it for the quote unquote right reasons. But when you had in the early 2000s into the mid 2000s, where the comic book movies made such a big impact at the box office, Blade was a huge surprise to Marvel themselves, Sony, who Marvel had sold the rights to, the movie rights for Blade, along with a bunch of other characters. And I think that was Sony. Someone in the chat, if I got that wrong, feel free to correct me and I'll put your comment up on the screen. But I believe it was Sony that owned Blade when they put out the movie in the mid-90s. Contradicting the claim that Black Panther was the first black superhero on the movie screen.
Exactly. Has no one ever seen
back in what, 2015?
Wesley Snipes was just
it's
awesome.
Not as though there were 3 Blade movies that started coming out in the 90s.
No, and people didn't. It even got to the point there were so many Blade movies that the third one got panned.
Yeah.
So, I didn't mind. I thought it was great, but I'm shallow.
But so there was this big shift in, Blade really kind of woke up Hollywood. And then you had the first X-Men movie coming out in 2000, and it made a big splash in Hollywood as well. And then you had the Spider-Man movie, and then that's what got the ball rolling. So by the mid 2000s, by 2005, there was already a big shift in the thinking of Warner Brothers, and I forget the company that owned Marvel prior to. Marvel has had so many different parent companies over the year. I lose track of who owned them and when. But anyway, there was a big shift at the executive level of the value of comics, and so that's where I noticed. Thank you, Stato. It was Toy Biz. Toy Biz owned Marvel. They bought them in the 90s, and then had to sell for a variety of reasons I won't get into. That topic for another show. So anyway, you get into the mid-2000s, and now all of a sudden you got these attitudes at the executive level, but now filtering down into the management level of Marvel and DC themselves of the important stuff is the movies. Yeah. And so the comics, we got to make sure that we're really putting our best foot forward with the films, and the comics become an afterthought. And it was in that process where I really believe that there was more of a widespread idea within the management and executive levels of what used to be respect for the reader slowly transforming into what would eventually become contempt for the reader.
And in the mid area in those 2000s, after the film started, that was complacency. Mm-hmm. They just thought, oh, we've got a market, we'll just carry on selling it. We don't need to try very hard. And they really needed to. There's a comment here talking about gas stations and grocery stores and stuff. Yeah, that was the newsstand. That was where it all should be. If their business was about comics, then when the MCU started, and for 10 years there would have been a spinner rack in every Odeon cinema or every cinema. Okay, now I'm not suggesting that everybody would have bought them, but they would have been there in front of people's faces. Okay, and there would have been some purchase, and there would have been some pickup. Okay, and also the problems they had were twofold. First, they're obviously crap at marketing, because
Yeah.
at least marketing comics,
Yes.
not marketing films and all the rest of it. There's obviously
Right.
people who know exactly what they're doing, but they're not marketing comics because they don't care about the comics. That's the way it comes across, at least. And if they'd had those out there, they still would have had the problem as like 2015 and what have you, of them changing the sex and the attributes of these characters, so that if some kid had seen Thor in the cinema and gone outside to the spinner rack and gone, "Where's Thor?"
Yeah.
It's his girlfriend.
Which
What's that all
happened.
about?
Yeah,
is
which
exactly what
happened many times. Yeah.
Exactly. Now the way to fix that, okay, is not to say don't do Jane Foster as Thor. Absolutely not. Do it. Do everything in comics. Find new markets. Do everything you can. Okay, but don't shit on the market you've already got. And
Yep.
that's part of what I was saying earlier about business activity. That I was thinking, God, would I ever do something like that in business? It's just like a suicide. Absolute, it's financial suicide. What the hell are you doing? Do both. Keep the 616 books going and just flood the market with other books. Throw it at the wall, see what sticks. Okay.
Yeah.
And if it works and there's a market for Jane, great. You've got a brand new character that you can make a film out of that people won't complain about because they've bought the comics anyway, and there is definitely a market for it.
Well,
You keep everybody happy.
Up until the mid 90s, there were still competent executives and somewhat competent executives, but there were definitely still competent marketing people, and you could see comics everywhere. And because you could see comics everywhere, people were buying licensed merchandise from those IPs, and they were buying them everywhere. And so back before, when we still had newsstand distribution at gas stations and grocery stores and the local, pharmacy, or I think you guys call them the chemist over there in the UK. So when they were treated as essentially a marketing expense out on the newsstand, it was great because it gave visibility to the products to countless millions of people. Because there was a visibility, they gained an awareness.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as long as they had an awareness, sales were phenomenal.
I'll give you a real world example, okay, of that. All right. Doctor Who is in the crapper.
Yep.
Okay. I'm not going to say anything about the content of the show, about who the actor is that plays it. Okay. They put it on at 8:00 at night, and they missed years out of in between series.
Yeah.
Okay. So they put a series on 1 year and then it wouldn't come back for another 2 years. All right. They did short series, they did long series. They didn't have any continuity to the way that they put it out. Okay. As far as how many times they put out a series and how regular the series was, or at what time on a Saturday night they put it out at.
Yeah.
That one thing on its own is what has killed Doctor Who. That's why there's no more Lego. That's why it's hard to find an action figure.
Right.
Okay? Because kids don't even know it bloody exists.
Well, and
if it's not in their faces at 5:00 on a Saturday afternoon and they can sit down with their mum and dad and watch a sci-fi show together, no matter what the content, no matter who the actors, okay, it's there right in front of them. But suddenly it became BBC drama.
Well, and I think that is it's another indicator, in my opinion, of the type of contempt for the customer that is now, been running rampant throughout the comic book industry,
throughout entertainment.
It's throughout entertainment,
pop
just
culture.
all the way across the board. Because when you've got contempt for the end user, and you say things like, "Oh, well, they're not my customer. It's this other middleman in the supply chain that's my customer."
Utter rot.
I think it comes from ignorance as to how business works, and I think it also comes from contempt, quite frankly.
That would be
And
like suggesting that Indiegogo was my customer.
exactly,
How
rather than the
ridiculous is
people who are
that?
buying your
Yeah,
books.
how ridiculous is that?
And I think where it comes from, I think it's been a progression over time, and I think that in the mid to late 2000s and into the 2010s, there was what I call informed contempt, meaning that there were executives, and by that point, there were a number of creators where they had gotten so committed to injecting their own personal agendas into their work. Um, and I believe there are specific reasons for that, but I won't go into them on this show. Maybe another time we can talk about it. But there was, politics are downstream from culture, and not only are they downstream from culture, but there often becomes this feedback loop between politics and culture, so that attitudes change in culture, which then get reflected in politics. And then because politics are shoved in our faces everywhere we go, every moment of the day, it gets amplified and then sent back to the
But
culture. And then the
yeah,
culture, a lot of people within the culture will absorb that and then amplify it. And then
but,
you get into this feedback
but
loop.
again, we've got this misnomer in my personal view of ideology and politics. Okay, so for instance, I saw someone screaming the other day. They'd put down this Neil Adams page, where I think is a very famous page talking about civil rights and what have you. And they were saying, "There, look at that. There's always been politics in comics. What are you talking about?" And it's like, yeah, you're right. There has. The difference is it wasn't ideological. It was simply referencing the political times. It was
Right.
referencing the politics of the times,
Of the day.
showing some of that in the comic book, and letting the reader take the opportunity to think for themselves. That's the difference. If you stuff a comic full of ideology, it becomes a propaganda pamphlet, and they're two completely different things. Politics are not the same as ideology. Okay, and so it's as much as to say there has been some politics put into a lot of these comics, which like I don't want to see any comic, okay, with the president of the United States on the front of it. I don't want to see a comic with Boris Johnson on the front of it. I don't want to see a comic with any politician on the front of it. I'm not interested. Saying that though, you know, put into comics what you like, but I do think it's the ideology that's important, and what's more important, whatever you call it, politics, ideology, whatever, is respecting the reader to make their own mind up, instead of hitting them over the head with whatever subject matter you decide you want to use.
Well, I think that
Who's Boris Johnson? Yeah, that's what we were saying.
He's
our prime minister.
Prime Minister of the UK.
He's a tosser.
So
sorry, that's an English
okay.
word. It's an English word, so everybody that's cool. It's an English word.
So anyway, one of the things that I was thinking about with this idea of contempt in the industry, and how I personally think that it mostly started within the publishing companies, and then it started to reflect in the work that was being produced. And I think what happened, and I referred to it as informed contempt, because I think that what was happening in the late 2000s was that there was a bunch of people in the entertainment industries, comics included, who thought that I don't know if they thought, I'm sure some of them thought that they needed to start pushing their own personal agendas into the work that was supposed to be escapist entertainment. I think that some of them did feel this need to do it, but others, I think they just went along with it. I think
Yeah.
I think they said, "Oh, okay, it's cool for us to do this now." So
Yeah,
then
I agree. Yeah.
they jumped on the bandwagon in a sense, so
I
that
think
by the time we get to the 2012 ish, there's this real surge, and then because of the delay from creation to publication and purchasing, it really starts showing up in 2013,
yeah.
and from then on, it's just been a progressively growing tidal wave.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
and I think at some point in there, it went from this in what I call informed contempt, where the these select group of creators and executives and whatnot were thinking that they knew what's what, and so based on that information, they get this contempt for the average reader, and they're like, they're gonna show us, they're gonna educate us, blah blah blah. But over time, you get enough people jumping onto that, eventually it becomes casual contempt, where it's just like you don't even know why subconsciously you feel contempt for your customers. You just do, because it seems like everybody does. That's just the way business is done now.
It's because it's become this corporate nature. And I see what you're saying. It's like, it doesn't matter whether there were people there that really wanted to do that, or whether they just felt comfortable, or that was the way things were done. Its essence, its starting point was the perception of the customer from a corporate perspective. Much like we were saying, because they don't make comics, they're not into making comics, they don't give a shit about the customer, and that bled down into that new band of creators, to the point that, like you say, it's like, oh yeah, all right, yeah, that's the way it's done. That, let's just get on with it. We'll just be contemptuous towards our customers, because that's the way you make comics. But it isn't.
And the indie side of the industry is not immune to this, because there are a lot of the way I see it, it more or less started with Marvel and DC, but then you had the advent of some of these indie publishers like Black Mask, or Devil's Due, or Oni Press, or Lion Forge, where they saw the big boys were doing this sort of stuff, and like, oh, I could make money making those types of comics. Well, let me start a company, and we'll be all about pushing those kinds of comics, which many of us would just consider to be trash compared to what we used to read, prior in generations prior. But now it seems like there's, at the time, I'm sure a lot of them were thinking, oh, here's a great money making opportunity. I can publish propaganda and get paid for it. Great.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said. The truth pill is that as much as you might hate or dislike ideology in your comics, or in your entertainment in general, only a percentage of that is coming from people who are ideological.
Yeah.
Most of it is coming from corporates and the corporate machine, who think that is the way to make money.
Right.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. We all talk about, oh, why Marvel doing this? Why are DC doing that? Why can't they think about making money? Well, they don't think they're going to make money out of comics anymore anyway.
Right.
That's why they're dealing with crap comics. So they don't give a monkeys about that. Okay. And then from there on, you spread out into the wider into the wider world of entertainment, Hollywood, whatever it might be, and they're taking corporate decisions that they think will make them money, and that includes wokeness, whatever it might be, ideology. It's not that they believe it. If you think that the corporations believe what they're doing, they don't. They may well be completely misguided, not just from the ideology perspective, but also from the fact that they think they're going to make money out of it. Okay, they're probably completely misguided, but they have no doubt that's why they are doing it. So I think was that back? Only Death Can Save Us from the Land, led by Boris Johnson. Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Someone's got to save us, because Boris didn't. So yeah, it's this contemptuous nature that kind of trickles down effectively to the people in the production environment, until they don't even, they're not even aware of it. They just are contemptuous, and it's a sad thing to see, because comics are a joyous thing.
Yeah.
They're
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's a tragedy to those of us who have been in it for a long time, and we got to live through what many consider to be the greatest time to be a comic book reader and collector, which was the 80s, because you still had a bunch of creators who had come up in the Silver Age and had essentially been part of the modernization of comics, how to make comics and sell comics and all of that. So a lot of them were still in the industry in the early 80s. And then during the 80s, we got to see, kind of the before and after effects of things like The Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, which, were only intended to be Elseworld type of stories, what if type of stories, and essentially was like a mirror to the industry, to say, for those of you who are saying, comics should be darker and edgier, and they should be geared at adults and not kids. Here's what that would look like.
Here's what you're gonna get. Yeah.
So let's let this be a teaching moment. We don't want all of our comics to go this way, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, because they sold as well as they did, the publishers, the executives said, "Oh, those are selling great, so we need to do that, but we need to multiply it out."
Yeah.
We saw this gradual, change of the type of.
But that's exactly the same as the ideology.
Yeah.
At the moment, so we need to get rid of that old stuff and sod that that market, that audience. We don't need them. We want a new audience. Instead of having both. Have both,
right.
and have a much bigger audience. And it was the same with those. And that comes down to multiple strands. It comes down to multiple things of why that was happening. Part of that was down to bad business, as in they got rid of the newsstands. Okay.
Yeah.
The newsstands are where all the all ages comics were. All ages comics bring in all ages, funnily enough. Okay. And so you widen your audience. So if you just say, I'm going to get rid of all that all ages stuff, no, we only want the dark stuff now. And you stick the dark stuff into a place where only certain people are going to go, in like comic shops, instead of having all ages stuff on the newsstand. Suddenly you've just halved your market again. Okay. You've got those people that grew up with it are now looking for something darker. I did exactly the same thing when I was a young man. I loved Killing Joke. I loved The Dark Knight Returns. I loved all that stuff. Oh, I was growing up. But I soon realized, within 10 years that the other stuff had vanished.
Yeah.
Where was all the all ages stuff? Where was it going? And because there was no newsstand and there's no all ages, you're not bringing up other new audiences behind the current one.
Right.
Comics should have everything in them and should be available everywhere. I know it's a bit.
I agree. I mean, and the fact that there's this recurring pattern of corporate publishers abandoning, and now for the past several years, actively insulting their previously established customer base as they're trying to chase a new one. This recurring cycle, in my opinion, has got it's not just that it has happened several times, but I think that the harm it has caused to the overall health of the industry has increased each time. I think it's become more harmful each time, to the point where now we've got, 10 years of this visible downfall, if you will, of the corporate comics industry. And it was to the point, it was so pervasive, these bad business practices, and a lot of the individuals who worked in the industry openly showing contempt for readers, In some cases, blocking on social media. Now we're in the 21st century, and now we're talking about the last 5 to 10 years. You get a bunch of creators, and Dan Slott is the first one that I became aware of, who I believe it was in 2009. Someone in the chat correct me if I get the date wrong, but I think it was in 2009 where Dan Slott told a reader to go F off. And
why would you ever do that? Why would you do that?
Nobody in the public saw him get any consequences for it. Now, maybe behind the scenes there were consequences, but as readers, we didn't see that. And other creators didn't see him get any negative consequences for that. So, again, we come back to this groupthink, which, is in all of entertainment, unfortunately. And then other creators started doing it. And because Slott was a big name back then, and he wasn't, at least visibly, he wasn't fired. He wasn't taken off of whatever books he was on. So then other creators started doing it, and then it just became a widely accepted practice from the perspective of readers. And so when you have your readership basically saying, oh, these people who make the books have contempt for us, well, that means I stop respecting them. And if I stop respecting them, or I stop respecting their work, then it's not that far of a leap to go from respect to contempt. So then you have, over the years, last 5-6 years, especially, you have a readership, or former readership now, that has become contemptuous of the corporate comics industry. And so that contempt has now been reflected right back to them. But then if they receive it as contempt, then they're going to come back even harder. And now you're in this feedback loop of contempt between the customers and the producers of the content,
which could all be fixed with just good customer relations, and
so pervasive that it went from the big two all the way down now to the smallest indie publishing houses, all the way down to some self-publishers who openly show contempt for wide swaths of potential customers. But they do it because, well, that's just the way business is done these days.
No, that's not the way business is done. That's the trouble. It might be the way the comic industry works, but it's not business. I don't know what it is. It's a mess. And this, again, this is not me talking ideologically. This is simply coming from business and observing and seeing the mess that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now we find ourselves in a situation where we've got contempt for the readers, contempt for a fair number of creators and publishing executives, publishers in general, whether it's the biggest one at Marvel, all the way down to the smallest one in the indies, all the way down to certain independent self-publishers, because they show so much contempt for potential customers, they receive a lot of it back from potential customers. And yet there's a bunch of us who, for the last several years, have been saying, just like you said, Russ, that's not the way business is done. That's not the way a professional behaves. We're going to start doing our own thing, and we're going to try to build a new industry from the ground up. And I think in partnership with the customers.
Yeah. And that's where the story turns, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's where we obviously we've spent 55 minutes pulling all this apart and complaining a little bit. But there's a silver lining to all this. There's the opportunity for us all to work together and make a better industry. And it doesn't have to be the same one. It can be a new industry. It doesn't. You don't have to build on the ashes of the old. Let's just go out and find our own way, and but learn the lessons. Okay, learn those lessons. The first lesson is don't lose your readers. Don't
Yep.
lose the support of the people that buy your books. So
Yep.
way back in the day, back in when I was reading comics as a kid, and I thought Stan Lee was talking directly to me in the editor's page and in the news page. That's the kind of connection that you want.
Yeah.
Okay, that people feel that they're on board with you,
Right.
that they're here for the ride, that they matter to you, that they matter to the creators, they matter to the people that are publishing these books, and you will get their support by doing that, by being transparent, by being there and answering their questions and being professional and giving them the opportunity to be part of the project with you. That's why crowdfunding is great. I don't think that crowdfunding on its own is the business model. It can't be. You've got to move on. You've got to have other things. You've got to find other ways. There is still a direct market out there. In fact, there's still a newsstand out there if the right people make the right moves. Okay. Comics can still sell in, corner shops, in chemists, in gas stations. They can still sell. It's just how you approach that. And I think that with the way that Diamond have collapsed to a certain degree, they certainly don't have the monopoly they had. The fact that Marvel and DC have gone out to different distributors, it's opening everything up.
Oh yeah,
it's opening up opportunities to new distributors, to new ways of getting your comics out. And if you can be professional and get a book out on a schedule, it doesn't have to be monthly, just a good schedule, and stick to it, you will find ways to get that out to the main market. And your crowdfunders can be part of that. Your backers, your core audience, the people that really love your work, they get that special connection with you. They get the VIP book. They get the extras. They get the exclusive content, and then they get to enjoy the fact that IP is then moving further out into the general market. They were there on the ground, and that's what it's all about. And you add to that connection that you've got, that we would, that like that original connection we were talking about in the letters page. That's what's important.
Well, and this is where we were talking about, you mentioned earlier that, kind of where the situation begins to turn, where you've got the downfall of the corporate comics industry, but then you've got the birth of this new area, let's say, within indie comics, because not all indies are doing the same thing, but you've got the birth of this new era, in my opinion, that started about 3.5 years ago, and is just gained momentum every year since, and I see it continuing into the future, where creators like yourself develop that sort of connection with potential readers. They go out and buy your books. This comment here from Oz Great Sage: I bought Only Death Can Save Us today because of Leroy, Crackhead, etc., saying how good it was. So here's an example of somebody who produces a book that people enjoy.
Thank you, Oz.
Russ establishes a rapport with his backers. Some backers receive the book, they love it, they recommend it to others, and then now you've got the dynamic that the big comic publishers wish they had, which they used to have, where you go into a shop, you get a like this, almost as a kid, it seems like an almost endless variety of great comics, which is what I had, in the late 70s and throughout the 80s and into the early 90s. And you read the stuff and you enjoy it, and then you recommend it to other people, and then they pick it up and they enjoy it and they recommend it to someone else. So now, that's an example. Russ is an example of somebody having learned the lessons and is not only doing good work, but doing a good job of establishing a customer base. Now, earlier in the chat, I'm going to try and find it again. Johnny Rando said a certain CG creator told him to F himself. This ain't the DMZ. Now, here's an example of, I have no idea who the creator was, but here's an example of someone not learning the lessons that we've talked about for the last hour, right? Or maybe 45 minutes, where we were really talking about this idea of how the comic industry went from such great heights to now such low lows. And if an indie creator is telling customers or potential customers to go F themselves for whatever reason, then you're not capitalizing on the opportunity you have to take a potential customer and turn them into an actual customer. Now, if the person, let's say Johnny was talking with this creator, whoever they were, and the creator didn't like something that Johnny said or Johnny did, it's that creator who decides how they're going to react. I mean, there are people who have tried to goad me into, getting into arguments and insulting them and whatnot. And I simply choose not to indulge them in their desire. And
No, yeah, don't get involved in. I mean, if there is an argument, fine. Just put your hands up and go, well, that's my opinion. Give them a smile, and that's the end of it. Don't start bad mouthing people. I spoke to someone earlier about this. I was on Indie Vault, and they had a letter come in, and somebody had screwed someone over, and it's like, fine, just ignore it. Put it in the past. Move forward. Professionalism it includes you shutting your mouth when it comes to slagging other people off. Don't do it. Okay, because it makes you look bad. It's the same with politics, isn't it? If a politician comes up on stage and doesn't tell you what they're for, they just slate everybody else. You're like, well, I don't like them. They still haven't got it, none of them. But
Right.
that's the way it works. People don't want to hear you be negative. Be positive. So we can sit here and we can talk about the industry and we can talk about what we're doing. But the bottom line is we want to be positive about it. We want to sell comics. We want to make comics. We want to engage with audiences. We want to push the medium forward. We want to entertain people. We want to be part of it. We want that interaction with the chat, with the audience, whatever you want to call them. That's it. That's what's important. You've seen a year of us all sitting in our houses. Interaction with people is so important. And this is a fantastic way of doing it. You entertain people, you interact with them, you connect with them. So professionalism, part of that professionalism is you keep your mouth shut when it comes to things like that. There's absolutely no requirement for it. Okay, make your book, keep your audience happy. Make sure you're transparent and available for them. If one of them is rude to you, shrug it off. Be the bigger person. Just walk away. It takes no effort.
And I will say, as somebody who has had a lot of experience in business, similar to yourself, Russ, in different capacities, one of the things that I learned early on is, and I'm grateful that I did, because it ended up serving me very well in my career, was anybody who's not currently a customer is a potential customer.
Yeah.
And even if they are, yelling at you, or they say they hate your product, or, whatever it is, they're still a potential customer. And I remember working for a major corporation. There was a point in time where I was doing work involved with customer service and technical support. And I gained a reputation for taking unhappy customers and either turning them around to where they became happy customers, or at least got things to the point where they no longer hated the company. And it was one of those things where it just got to a point where I actually went to the bosses and said, hey, you know what? If you want, just anytime a quote unquote problem customer shows up, just send him over to me. And it's not like I had some magic wand, or that I was, like the greatest customer service rep the world had ever seen, or the greatest technical support analyst, or anything like that. It was simply that I didn't lose sight of the fact that this is somebody who, from their own perspective, has a very legitimate
Yeah.
complaint or a very legitimate problem, or however they saw it, and just treating them as a legitimate person and a legitimate customer, and that their business was valued by the company, went a long way towards, kind of bringing them to the point where they were willing to have a civil, respectful conversation. And at that point, when they find that, this person representing the company, or in our case, the comic book creator, is wanting to engage with them in a respectful manner, then for most people, you're 75% of the way to making them happy. So even if it's somebody who you think is totally disingenuous, and they're not a real, quote unquote, real customer, like they either didn't buy your book, or no matter what you say, they'll never buy your book, whatever interaction that you have with them in public is being seen by a lot of other people in public.
Yeah.
And they'll get an impression of, do I like the way that creator treats people, or do I not like it?
Yeah, no, it's all about that professional persona, and just making yourself approachable. And uh, from a life perspective, understanding that everybody's got their own story, everybody's got their own journey. You got to walk in the mile of another person's shoes before you really understand what they're going through. So be kind and give people the room to talk and to express themselves. Something that it seems doesn't happen an awful lot on the internet or on Twitter, but that's because there's a lot of people that are pretty cowardly. But do the best you can, and it will help you. It will help you connect with people, and ultimately it will help you. Get them to get your books and share in the story. So I have a question to answer. I know why I'm wearing a hat, because Anthony Figaro said I should, so I did.
Oh.
Yeah.
Was this? I must have missed that question. Was somebody
why are we
asking?
both wearing hats? Yeah, why are we both wearing hats? I understand.
Well,
You've got a kind of a Malin look going on. Okay.
Yeah, well, I decided to wear this particular hat because it's produced by. This is a Cyberfrog beanie.
That's quite cool hat.
And Cyberfrog is of course produced by Ethan Van Sciver, who has very publicly and to his former embarrassment stated that he used to be a comic book creator who looked down on readers. He was part of the corporate comic culture where that was just the way it was. Creators were elevated and readers were devalued. And he has talked about how it took your boy Zach, formerly known as Diversity in Comics, making points about problems in the comic book industry and pointing out how customers should be valued and not held in contempt. And Ethan has said that it was listening to the channel and hearing this message a couple times, he realized that he was doing that and he really didn't like it. And so he set about turning that around. And so he has mentioned several times that he considered himself part of the problem up until that point, and then since then has been trying to become part of the solution. And what do you know? On his own, he established a social media presence. On his own, he built up a customer base, and he created a franchise, or I should say revived a franchise with Cyberfrog that now has seemingly very broad appeal, and he's making millions of dollars now each year. And it all, in my opinion, it all comes back to him changing his mindset about who his customers were and how they should be treated. Because without that, he never would have built the platform that he's got now, and he wouldn't have the success that he's got now as an indie comic book creator, starting out as a self-publisher, but now he's growing his company. He's publishing other books by other creators, and it all comes back to how did the creator view the customer, and how did they treat the customer?
Yeah, and Woodrow, you're right. He is he has got a big ego. The jury is out as to whether I'd want to drink a beer with him or not. I don't know because you never can tell. But from what I've seen, from what I've experienced, he seems like an entertainer, and he's just passionate about what he does, and because of that, you've got to give him props. I have to say that I can't sit and watch 4 hours of live stream. But the occasional time when he pops in and says something on other people's channels it's very pertinent information, and he's very funny. He does make me laugh. So, I like I say, I don't know. I've never met him in person. I think I'd probably like to, but you don't know until you do. But on the face of it, and you can't take away from what he's done,
Right.
what he's built, what the professionalism, as far as he's kept an audience entertained and happy, and he can prove it to the tune of $1 million every time he does a campaign. That's all you need to know, and that's all business should need to know.
The results speak for themselves.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
I really think that we're now entering a phase, both within CG and I suspect also outside of CG in the general indie comic scene, where there's been steady growth over the last couple years of the number of people who either become creators for the first time, or people who used to work in corporate comics and are now going strictly indie. Mm-hmm. And the number of, not just the number of people who are doing the work now, but the rate of growth. How many different shows now, how many different channels are there with shows where they've got over 1,000 subscribers?
Yeah.
Where they used to get 2 or 3 people tuning in for a live stream, but now they regularly get 15 to 20.
Yeah.
Or the people who used to get 30, and now they're regularly getting 60 or 70 at turning up for every show. The number of those types of examples just keeps growing.
Yeah. He's led by example. He's created an environment where there's a model to follow. It's not a strict model, because nobody can be Ethan Van Sciver, that's for sure.
Right.
He is what he is. Not in no way more than when I desperately wanted to be Jim Lee in the 90s, that I could be Jim Lee. Mm-hmm. But these people are what they are. Jim Lee entertained in the way that he did, and even through the comics only, because as much as his work is lovely, he's not entertaining to watch.
No.
But as far as watching him draw, that's great. Yeah. But he himself is not particularly entertaining.
Right.
But somebody like Ethan Van Sciver, he's shown you that you can be entertaining as an artist. You can, or as a creator, you can be there and you can do other things. And again, I was talking to someone either yesterday or the day before, and I mentioned this before, who would have thought that when people were talking about new technology and how it would change comics, mm-hmm. that it isn't necessarily PDFs and digital comics, but it's these environments, these digital environments across the internet, international, that are effectively gaining you audiences where you couldn't have gained them before. That's where the new technology is. That's where the growth is, simply by finding new ways of approaching the problem.
And how telling is it, Russ? We've been talking about how contempt of customers by industry professionals kind of crept into the industry and became a widespread thing, and how in return contempt from customers toward, corporate comics and people, a lot of the pros that work there, how in return that developed. And now how fitting is it that we're seeing this rise of a new version of the comic book industry, let's say, and it's starting in the indies, not in corporate comics, and it's about one-to-one human interaction. It comes down to how are people treating each other? Is it with contempt or is it with respect? Is it with an expectation of you must buy this because I have produced it, or is it, hey, I'm going to try and entertain you, and I'm hoping that if I can entertain you, that you'll also be interested in taking a look at this thing that I've produced, this book. And if you think it looks good and you want to buy it, then great, we can do business.
Yeah, exactly. But also an environment where I saw, I think it was Stat was saying, not quite sure who it was, but saying about us all helping each other.
Oh, it was Billy. He says not many examples of subcultures on YouTube actually helping each other build one another's platforms like we are.
Exactly. I mean, I put my first book out. I've got my own channel. I've had it for quite some time. I'm not an entertainer. Okay, I just am not. But that's not the only way out there. Okay, the making yourself available and transparent and approachable is just as important. Okay, so I don't have the channel. I don't have hundreds of thousands of people on my channel. I have a channel that I can direct people to say, look, this is how I do stuff. I have a past. I have a rep. Okay, but then there were other people out there like Michael Bancroft, who were there and willing to help their fellow creators.
Yeah.
And willing to help their audiences connect with those creators. So you don't see that kind of support and cross-pollination. And I don't think you see it anywhere else. It's an amazing thing. And comics is part of the reason, because comics themselves, the subculture of comics, like, you used to go to a comic shop, you used to go to a convention before they became multimedia conventions, okay, where you've got lots of actors sitting there signing photographs of themselves. When people went for comics, and there would be all kinds of people there, true diversity, people from all kinds of backgrounds, all colors, sexes, whatever you want to, they were all there, because that's what comics do. They bring people together if they're given the opportunity. And there's so much negativity about in corporate that once you take that away, just the act of creating comics, of getting out there and talking to people, of showing your stories, and having like YouTube and the other creators that extra level that we now have that we didn't have before. It's a heady mix that's we've got an opportunity now. I think we're in another golden age. We really are.
Yeah, I think so. Is Bristolian Dave here? If you're not familiar with Bristolian Dave, he's from Bristol.
All right, me babbers.
And he often, his catchphrase, his rallying cry, his battle call is "All right, me babbers."
I like that. I like the way you do the English accent. It's I feel like I'm in Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins. Dave says, "I found CG." Oh, I'll do it in my Mary Poppins Bristolian accent.
Do it.
I found CG at the start of the pandemic. Since then, I've gotten way more into indie comics and make loads of great friends. I've even been inspired to start my one project. Before, I was pure Marvel.
That does sound exactly like Dave. Actually, it's uncanny.
I'll say I enjoy all of the accents throughout the UK, but the Bristolian one to me is probably the most fun. It's almost like a mashup of 6 other accents.
The weird thing is over in Bristol, okay, over on the west coast, that it sounds exactly the same as just up the road from me on the east coast. Okay. They all sound like pirates. I don't know why, but they all sound like pirates. I got the same thing here, so there you go. That accent is something else. It was pretty good. I was impressed.
That's funny.
Sounds like Jim Broadbent.
I wanted to touch on a counterpoint that Smiling Bandito offered, and then I think we need to kind of put a bow on this topic and show off some new Outliers finished penciled pages to the good folks of Fultonland. Smiling Bandito said, each show has a solid 80% of the same overlap of 1,000 subs, though, Joe. I don't know how much is growth or just the community maturing. And I'll say that that's a good point. I will agree that it's hard to quantify Bandito, but where I think I partially disagree is I think it's pretty clear of how many of these shows were around a couple of years ago. I don't think, well, there's an obvious increase in how many of these shows are around and how many have been able to start up. But I have also seen a distinct increase of new people coming in each year. And because, there have been people who've been around since, mid 2017. There are people who were around for Gamergate and then saw the conception, if you will, of Comicsgate when it was just a few YouTubers who were making very pointed criticisms of corporate comics in the industry, all the way through to today. For those of us who have been around for more than a couple of years, we've seen kind of the birth of CG in its current form, if you want to call it that, as far as being a marketplace of both ideas and products where people can be free to buy and sell and produce and comics free of corporate comics garbage, whether that's in the form of the constraints that are put on them or the culture of it or whatever. I've seen so many people who have started shows and are catering to the same general crowd, but I see a lot of different specific audiences for those channels where, there's some overlap, but I see more distinct viewers in different shows than I used to. It used to be in 2018, 2019, I'd go to all these different channels and it was more, as the years progressed, but it was the same basic group. But I now, no matter what show I go into, I see more unique people in those shows than I saw 2 years ago.
It was interesting listening to Mike's show last night.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one where people were talking about how they, found different creators and the groups within groups and just how they approached the whole thing and how they were, some of those people were brand new to comics, which was fantastic. That's funny. Sorry guys, I stepped out for a minute. What happened to Bristolian Dave? I heard him talking, so I came back in the room, but he's not on the panel. Very good.
And Dave is very proud of I guess Bristol's native son, Blackbeard the Pirate.
Arr!
Oh, so Russ, what do you say we show off some Outliers pages?
Sure. What would you like for me to show off?
Let's start with pages 1 through 5. Let's step through those just to give people a refresher.
Okay.
And then let's go with 6 through 8.
Okay. All right. The full works. Here we go.
All right.
Okay. So there we have our
So
chapter start.
Yeah. So this will be where the title of the chapter will be, which is called Rookie Mistakes. And then at the bottom of the page, we'll have production credits, everybody who's working on the book. And this will be the beginning of every chapter within the story arc will have a title page, and the imagery will essentially be, if we could distill the entire 24 pages down to one image, what would it be?
Do you know what I like about this? What I like
What
about this idea
What do
is
you
that
like about this idea?
what I like about this idea is you've got the covers, which we've been talking about, the kind of style and how you want them to look,
Mm-hmm.
and they're a particular, they're very 80s inspired.
Mm-hmm.
But this is almost like a cover from the 60s, because you might have a speech bubble on it. There's going to be credits on it. There's going to be a title on it. And it's
Right.
almost like those old covers that used to have speech bubbles on them,
Mm-hmm.
and big, massive titles for the. So it's almost like you've got a cover within a cover.
Yes.
And I absolutely love that. I love the concept. I don't think I've seen anyone else do that yet.
Oh, thanks.
Because obviously it's built on things that we love.
Yes.
But it's an original way of reproducing it, and I really like that. I like the idea of being able to have the opportunity to do the cover we're going to do, and then with each section have like a mini cover. I love that. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you like it so much. I when I was sitting down and developing the universe of the Outliers, I was also thinking about what are the types of things we can do from a production standpoint that honor the stuff that we love about the past while blending in cutting edge technology and modern ways of working and that sort of a thing, to produce a story that is going to look like it would be right at home in between your stack of comics from the 80s and your stack of comics that were produced this year.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
So this is page 1, and we're basically starting to get introduced to the Outliers here. They're on their first mission as a team, and we've got their Agent Maria Santos is basically their field supervisor as well as their government liaison. So she is, if she has to get involved, she will, but her primary job is to observe the team and interface between them as government operatives and the general public. So that's why she's in the background with binoculars, and she's kind of setting the ball in motion at the start of this mission, which is to capture another outlier, somebody with superhuman powers, the guy with the chainsaw, who they have been told, is in the country illegally and is superhuman, and the government agency that the Outliers work for, which is the OIA, the Outliers Intelligence Agency, they have tasked our Outliers team with capturing this guy, Dennis Vedmedenko, and bringing him in so that they can debrief him, find out why he's in the country, find out the extent of his powers, and assess how much of a threat is he to the United States citizens, if any. Oh, thank you, Woodrow. He says, dang, Joe, I haven't been really excited for Cape stuff in a while. This is awesome. You guys are going to kill it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Woodrow. I really appreciate that.
We're enjoying ourselves.
We're having so much fun.
There's a splash.
Yeah, so here's where, Dennis, he took off running. He's trying to evade capture, as one would. And now it's kind of gotten to the point where the team has to fight him. At first, they just wanted to just talk with him and get him to voluntarily come in with them. And, easy breezy. But Dennis has very good reasons for not trusting these guys. And so he takes off trying to get away. And now it becomes a true capture mission where they have to take him against his will, essentially, and bring him back to OIA. So here we've got Terrence Hightower, high tea, he's transforming.
Rawr.
He's transforming into his massive form because they've discovered now this guy, he not only has superhuman strength, but he's got superhuman agility and endurance and whatnot. Now, Mo Biggs has a concern I'd like to address. I see a lot of action in this book. I trust you to give it to us straight. Did you get so excited writing these fight scenes that you forgot to include coffee shop gossip with the gals? Yes,
Yeah.
Mo. I did fail you. I failed Russ. I failed Ink Spots. I did get so caught up with introducing the characters in what I hoped would be an entertaining way. I want, and making this an action-packed book that I completely forgot to include the coffee shop gossip where they're sitting around with the gals and I'm sorry. That's all I can say is I'm sorry.
On a serious note, this is, I'm very, very comfortable with the way this is written. So at the moment, obviously, I've not seen a tight script. What I've seen is the progression. But I can guarantee you that there will be story very well inserted in and around the fight sequences and the action and the fun and the pace. Much like I tried very hard to do with Only Death Can Save Us. So you're not bored while you're getting any kind of, info dump. There's always moments in comics where you require an info dump, but it's how it's done. So that you don't get bored reading it, but also there do need to be quiet times. We spoke about this earlier, didn't we? Quiet times.
Yeah.
Where, there were you were talking about Claremont's run, weren't you, where there would be quiet times in between the space action and the cosmic amazement that you'd be reading about, and then they would go off to a ball game just to quiet for a few pages, or there might be a coffee shop scene just for a few pages where you dissected and gave the reader a chance to calm down. Who would have thought that modern comics would have thought that was a good way of writing books?
Oh, not me.
Just incredible to think that they think that people would want to read that in a comic. No, that's not where we're going. But have no fear, there will be there's lots of story, and the stuff that I've been told about so far is incredibly interesting. It's got a really great arc. There's some good stuff coming.
Yeah. So Russ mentioned that he hasn't gotten a formal script yet. Initially we were going to work the full script method, but some things happened in my life that I had to deal with, some family stuff that prevented me from getting everything into a formal script format for Russ. So what we decided to do was work Marvel method, which is I provide him with a detailed outline. And when you work this way, it depends on the writer artist duo. Sometimes the outline is very loose. Sometimes it's very detailed. So I've provided Russ with a detailed outline, which he can draw from. And after the pages are completely penciled, and we're very close to finish, I'm happy to say, Russ has been just cranking out great work at a great pace. And so once I give him my final notes on the last batch of pages, he'll go through and do a final pass on the pencils. And then chapter 1 will be completely done as far as pencils are concerned. And we can move on to inks. And at that point, that's where I take his finished artwork and I take my outline, and then I take it from outline to final script. So I've got dialogue in there for him where I think it really is critical so that he knows which expressions to draw and he can decide, exactly to what degree this expression will be on this character's face, and so on and so forth. But now that I've seen all of the artwork, I can then take the visual information that Russ has put down on the page. I can combine that with what I had in my outline, and so he plays artistically. He plays off of the outline and adds his own element to it, and then I take his visual storytelling. I play off of that. That's how we get to a final script, and at that point, the book, after we've both gone back and forth on the story, we get it into a final enough shape that it's ready for colors, because that adds more elements to the story. And then I can tweak the script if need be to further improve the story, because now I'm playing off of ink spots as coloring work. Once the colors are done, and then I make any final adjustments on the script, then it goes over to Eric Weathers for lettering. And then again, that's another element that we add into the story, because the lettering is an art form in and of itself, and it adds another element. It adds more visual information. So I then am free to tweak the script further. Maybe it's dialogue, maybe it's sound effects, based on what Eric brings into the project. And so I'm really happy with how things are going. We've had some setbacks on the production side, just as far as some things that have gone on with me, some things that have gone on with ink spots. But I'm happy to say that those setbacks have not affected the overall product schedule because of how I built it out. And so what has to be done is being done. There's some other stuff that's flexible as far as when we do it, so we can just move things around as needed to make sure that everybody keeps working. All the trains arrive on time, so it's absolutely no problem, because we all know what we're doing and we work really well together, and it's just been a lot of fun. So I don't know, Russ, is there anything you want to add to that before we close the show down for the day?
No, nothing at all. Yeah, I'm really enjoying myself. It's really good fun. It's good.
You want me to put this up on the screen?
If you want. I don't know what you want to say. That's right at the end, so we won't give away the ending. But they're sitting on a log there, chatting to each other, and that's part of what we would. I just thought this was a good example of when you were talking about giving me a clue as to who's talking to who, and where they should be positioned and how they should be positioned.
Yeah.
So the fact that the Saint is on there next to High T.
Yep.
And the fact that he's Falcon is just beyond, so you can look over his shoulder to see High T, and then the Saint can then be chatting casually to High T in that way, and then the script can kind of lay down over the top. I've done my job, and it's then for the words themselves and the artistry of the lettering to finish the job off. So yeah, it's been great fun. Actually, I've enjoyed myself very much doing these pages so far. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next 24. Depending on how we work it out, we might go straight to inks on this first 24 set of 24 pages. If that's the case, then you will be able to see a few of those getting done on my channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had my first inaugural stream this week on Monday. I have streamed before, but I wanted to give it a brand, so it's called Enter the Dojo with me, and I've still got to set up my cameras properly. But I did a sketch cover of War Machine for a guy called Thomas, and that went really well. So hopefully I'll be able to do some capture of me inking some of these pages up. But we're fortunate because Joe has done so much groundwork and so much planning that we can switch things up as we need to. So we've always got something to fill in with. He's also been very kind, and we're taking Only Death Can Save Us 2 into account, so that I'm available for both sets of work, and that we're both working together. There will be a moment in time where I'm doing a couple of months solid on Only Death Can Save Us, but at the same time I'll be constantly available to Outliers. So it means that I personally at the moment feel very much part of a team that I'm prepared to stay with. So I've got two houses that I'm in. I am with Arrow Comics, and they're my Arrow Comics bros.
Mm-hmm.
And I am also with Outliers. I have Outlier Comics bros, but I feel very much it very much locked in. This is, I've found a home. And as long as we entertain you,
Mm-hmm.
that home will remain solid for quite some time. So that's the idea. And I'm thoroughly enjoying the work because it's everything that I wanted to do. Just I bought Only Death Can Save Us out as my thing.
Yeah.
But this is similar in its approach. The art style is slightly different. I'm not being quite so graphical. I hit for something in the first Only Death.
Yeah.
I went for something very specific, and now I'm loosening up and doing some other things. So the core style, I'm still there, but I'm playing with it, and this style we're producing for Outliers is something a little bit different again, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So a little bit more line work, as in there'll be more. There won't be as many solid blacks.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a little bit more texture.
Yeah.
So it's just a growth on my part, which is great because Joe has facilitated that and said, look, do your thing. Let's find something, and together we have. So yeah, very, 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 very pleased. It's all looking great. Thank you, Lord Crackhead. I feel wanted and accepted. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much.
Got one thing. Sorry,
yeah.
one thing. There was somebody earlier on asked me about the X-Men piece that they were after. I can't remember who it was. I think it's something to do with the X-Men piece I had on the auction. Just anybody who's interested, just contact me. Russ@createuk.net, or you can get me on DM me on Twitter, or you get me on Facebook or whatever. Just shout me, and I'll try and apply myself to whatever you require.
There's Russ's email address. So I think we'll end on. Oh, Amanda, thank you so much for reminding me. I was about to end the show with.
Did I miss the trivia?
Oh, Amanda saved my bacon.
Didn't
she?
She?
That's why she's the senior counselor in chief.
Yes.
To the Citizen King of Fultonland.
Well done, Amanda.
Oh my goodness. Can't believe I almost closed the show out without doing the trivia. Someone's going to win some free comics. So I just want to read Smiling Bandito's comment. He said, "You guys are great for comics. Really appreciate how you approach everything and excited for what you're producing together."
Thank you.
Thank you, Bandito. That's very kind. And I just want to say that Russ and I very much appreciate everybody who's shown any interest in the Outliers. And we really look forward to the rest of the year where we can put the book in front of people and, kick off the campaign. And the book will either be done before we start the campaign, or it will be done before the campaign ends. Yeah. There are some variables over the next several months that I just can't predict with 100% certainty, but I can at least say that it'll either be done before the campaign starts or before the campaign closes down. The book will be done so that when the campaign closes, we just send the files off to the printer, and then book gets printed and then shipped out. So a relatively short wait time.
Yeah.
So let's get to our trivia question, because last week we had Peter Samedi on the show, publisher of Alterna Comics, and I said that I was going to pull a trivia question from last week's show and I would pose it on today's show. And the first person to put the answer into the chat wins a bundle of Alterna Comics free of charge, zero shipping. I'm going to cover that. And whoever is the winner, I will chat with offline, and I'll get a sense for what kind of comics you're interested in. And then I will put together a bundle of Alterna Comics based on your interest, and then ship them out wherever you may be, international shipping included.
What a prize.
So everybody get your typing fingers ready. The question is, in which year did Alterna Comics start publishing single issue newsprint? Go.
And
now vivet. Stato says he already has most of Alterna's output. Oh,
1776.
No, Snuggie, that would be the George Travlos historical press, 1776.
What is the answer?
The answer is 2017. Yeah. The first answer was also the correct answer. We got a lot of great guesses here, though. 2014, 2013, 2018.
That was close.
1984. I like that reference, Woodrow. Very Orwellian of you. Snuggie Jr., 1941. That was a great movie.
Johnny Rando. I think that was the Magna Carta, wasn't it?
So let's go back to our winner, Amanda B. So you have won the Alterna bundle. I will chat with you offline, and we'll figure out what you would like to see, and I'll put those together and ship them out to you free of charge. So with that, the show has come to an end. Russ and I thank you all very much for your time. We know you could spend it doing anything else, and yet you choose to spend it here with us. So we thank you. We appreciate you. And let's do it again next week, shall we?
Yeah. Come see us.
All right. Bye.